Hey guys, welcome back to Free to Grow. On today's video, we are going to be grinding some of our pasture-raised pork, and we use that for sausage or any recipes that require ground pork throughout the year. This year we raised two Berkshires on pasture, and this is the yield of the ground pork that we get from raising these pigs. So we process our own pigs, and after we get all the cuts, we like pork chops and ribs and the tenderloin, and we do some roasts, and we actually also cure prosciutto, and we do bacon. So this is all what's left after all of those cuts. And as we're butchering our hogs, we just keep a tub where we throw all our trimmings, and we actually end up using the whole lower part of the shoulder for ground pork because it is actually just the perfect ratio of fat to meat. And we get, I'd say it's like an 80-20 that we use for our ground pork. That's not an exact science because depending on how much fat your hogs have, you will end up with a little bit fattier pork. But I just kind of keep an eye on that ratio. I don't weigh it or anything, and especially after I run it through the grinder or start to run some through the grinder, I just can visually tell. But pork is delicious with extra fat, so I'm not too concerned about it. A lot of the time, an issue when you're grinding meat is not enough fat. Well, that's usually not the problem with pork. Now, this year we did cure some prosciuttos, so we ended up with a little bit less ground pork than we could have. But typically, I'd say we get about 20 to 25 pounds of just ground pork from each hog, and that's because we do not grind any of the hind quarters, and we keep all those other cuts that we like. So here, I'm using a carnivore grinder. It's a Cabela's grinder, and this is the 1.5 horsepower model. Any grinder will work. We've ground venison with just a KitchenAid attachment, and actually I've taken pork out of the freezer and ground it with that KitchenAid grinder, and it does the job. It just depends on how big the job is that you're doing. So what you see here is a sausage stuffer. So we also have this brand is a Hakka sausage stuffer, and I think Weston makes one. There's lots of different ones you could find on Amazon. And we are not using this to actually fill sausage into casing. We are just going to take this ground pork unseasoned and pack it in 1 pound packages. So that's kind of our first tip here is we don't pre-season our ground pork for the year. We don't set aside a certain amount for breakfast sausage, Italian sausage. We just leave it ground. We don't even add salt. So this is just ground pork. And then as we pull it through the year, we decide then what we're going to season it with. So if we're going to do a breakfast sausage, we use like a sage, salt, clove, pepper kind of seasoning mix. If a recipe calls for sweet Italian or hot Italian sausage, then we'll season it accordingly. But when you do it this way, you're not married to 15 pounds of breakfast sausage. Maybe you get tired of breakfast sausage or 15 pounds of sweet Italian sausage. You just can pull it out and you can use it for what you'd like. So the way this sausage stuffer works is this particular one holds about 4 pounds of ground pork, and then as you crank it, it will pump the sausage out the end, like where you could put that into a casing, but we're just slipping the vacuum sealed bags, which are a good size for 1 pound, and we fill them that way. Because pork is fatty, it can be kind of a sticky mess to try and by hand fill these vacuum seal bags. So even if you don't ever fill sausage casings, I think this purchase is worth it just for putting your ground pork into packages. Once you get a hang of this, you start to get a feel too for how much a pound is. And Liz and I work together where one of us will fill the sausage stuffer and pipe it into the vacuum seal bags. The other one is then kind of taking those and either labeling them or stacking them over near our vacuum sealer. And this just helps so one person has, messy hands and one person doesn't, so that they're not, getting pork fat all over everything. Now you can make your packages any size you'd want, but I would suggest that you make them consistent. And I think 1 pound is a good idea, even if you typically use 2 pounds per if you're preparing meals for your family. But if you know that they're 1 pound or at least close to 1 pound, then you can be also consistent with your seasoning as you go on to season it throughout the year. And this is a similar thing to like when we do bacon. You might decide, oh, I didn't like that breakfast sausage. It wasn't spicy enough, or it was too sweet. And this way you can also kind of play with certain things and decide what you like. Or if it's for a particular recipe, you could make it less salty, more salty, etc. Um, when this uh, sausage stuffer cranks down, there is an air valve that releases air on top, so you don't get any bubbles or anything air passing through. And it also is really nice when you're filling these 1 pound vacuum seal bags that it fills the meat all the way to the corners, so that later on when you go to vacuum seal it, you don't end up with air pockets inside your vacuum seal bag. It's another benefit of using the sausage stuffer. We do keep a scale there just to check ourselves every once in a while. I don't know that we weigh every single one because, like I said, you start to get a feel for it. And then the next step is to use our trusty Amazon vacuum sealer. The vacuum sealer, we're just waiting for it to die. I say this was a $30 purchase, and we have used it so many times, and it just will not die. So we just seal our packages. Another tip here for freezing them is to uh, pat them flat after they're sealed. You'll see that they stack a lot easier that way. Once we fill them, we kind of press them flat, and then we can stack them in the freezer. Now, when you go to put them in the freezer, um, don't just stack 40 blocks of ground pork on top of each other. If you can, lay them out in a layer, or spread them out as much as you possibly can within your freezer, so that they freeze evenly. And this is a similar thing we do when we freeze whole chickens, because if you just pile a whole bunch of room temperature or warm meat into a freezer, then what's inside the middle won't freeze, and you could end up with some spoilage actually. So we always make sure that everything's kind of spread out even so that it can freeze quickly. And then once it's frozen, then we can go back and stack and organize our freezers. This vacuum sealer and most vacuum sealers have an option for wet or dry seal. When we're doing ground pork, we use the dry mode, and that just makes sure we get a lot of that air out. Ground, if you find that there's a lot of moisture in your grind, then you might want to use the moist mode so you're not sucking that moisture into your vacuum sealer. But I typically would say that the dry mode should work just fine. It's so rewarding to put away this food for our family, and it's just so much fun when we pull up a recipe and we can just walk out to the garage, to the deep freezes, and get the ingredients. More and more of our ingredients are coming straight from our homestead, and it just adds to our cooking experience and our connection to food. And we're just so grateful for this journey. We're so glad you guys are joining us on Free to Grow. If you like this content, please like and subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.